Hi, and welcome to Modern Web. Okay, can you all see my slides? We good? Okay, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to Modern Web. We have a really cool talk today as we discuss the state of accessibility. I think I'm having some technical difficulties. So I'm gonna just go ahead and talk. My slides don't seem to be working. Sorry about that. We do have two sponsors for today's talk. This.Labs, they are the parent company of This.Media. They specialize in mentoring, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. So be sure to follow them on Twitter at This.Labs. We do have another sponsor, which is Kendo React.
Yeah, and I'm TJ from the Kendo React team. With Kendo React, essentially, we make a suite of premium UI components that's going to range from the simple stuff like inputs and buttons to form controls to more complex stuff like grids and charts and Gantt charts and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I think core to this audience, accessibility is core to everything we do. We have a lot of users and customers in industries like government, insurance, and banking, where accessibility is a mandate, a requirement. And so we adhere to a number of accessibility standards, keyboard navigation, all that good stuff. And we also kind of do accessibility on hard mode, because if you haven't tried doing keyboard navigation on a data grid or a Gantt chart, it's a fun time. Let's just put it that way. So if you're interested, if you need premium components for your applications, check them out. It's kendoreact.com.
Okay, perfect. So I am one of your hosts for today. My name is Daisy Nolan. I am a front-end software engineer at Publicist. I'm really excited about today's talk because accessibility is something that is very personal to me. You can follow me on Twitter at Daisy_Nolan.
And my name is Susan Ma. I am one of the co-hosts here for the State of Accessibility event today. I'm also a software engineer here at This.Dot. I'm also super excited because accessibility is one of those things that I feel like is never emphasized enough, and especially as a junior dev. I know in my specific learning, it's always something that's a little bit on the back burner. So I'm glad that we can talk to some experts today to share some of their stories and some of their tips. And hopefully anyone who's listening in who's also a junior dev or just someone who's interested in accessibility will have an awesome time and ask some questions during this talk.
Okay, so I think I figured out the technical part. So I think I have the slides up. Sorry, everyone, for that. It happens. So we do have an amazing group of panelists today. I'm going to allow them to just introduce themselves briefly.
And I think I'm first. My name is Carrie Fisher. I'm a senior accessibility consultant and trainer at DQ. And I'm also an HCI PhD student at Iowa State University.
Hi, I'm Nick Steenhout. I'm an independent accessibility consultant. I've been doing web accessibility for a very, very long time. I'm also the host of the Accessibility Rules podcast. You can find that at A11YRULES.com. I invite you particularly to listen to the short series, the sound bites, where disabled people talk about the barriers they experience on the web.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna E. Cook. I'm a senior accessibility designer at Northwestern Mutual. I'm also a graduate student at the Atlas Institute of CU Boulder, focusing on inclusive design and accessible design.
Hey everyone, I'm Austin Gill. I'm a full stack developer at a company called Reveal Biosciences. I also created and maintain an open source project called Vuetensils, which focuses on accessible UI components for Vue.
Hi everyone, my name is Anuradha Kumari. I am a front-end developer and working as development specialist at MediaOcean. So I maintain a website called Explore Alley, so explore-a11y.netlify.app, where I share what I learn about accessibility and some examples on how we can create accessible components. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal Preston Watson. I am a quality and accessibility engineer at Salesforce and the lead accessibility lead for our nonprofit and education clouds.
Okay, great. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Susan.
Awesome. So as you guys can see, these are some of the questions that we'll be going over for the accessibility topic today. Feel free to take a screenshot just to get an idea of what we'll be discussing, but we'll have the panelists kind of help answer questions, talk about their experiences, maybe even relating to the current job or projects that they're working on. So yeah, we'll keep that slide up just for a few more seconds. So feel free to take a look at some of the questions. And if you're watching this live, go ahead and enter any questions that you guys might have in the live chat. We'll do our best to not only get through these questions, but get through any viewer questions as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have the WCAG 2.2 is set to be scheduled to be published this year in 2021. So for the panelists here, what changes, updates, or new requirements do you predict will be added?
All right, I guess I'll start. I'm not part of this committee, but I'm going to pop in this in the chat. If somebody wants to pop this into the YouTube chat, that'd be great. There are quite a few new introductions and some that will affect you if you're level single A or double A. And then there are, I think there's one that's a triple A as well. So, and I know, Nick, you've worked on committees like this before, the W3C as well, but to me, I don't see anything that seems too earth-shattering. A lot of these are like best practices that are being pumped up to actual requirements, like target size, for instance, is an example.
Yeah, I think the effort around 2.2 was to improve access for folks with low vision and cognitive accessibility, which were aspects of the guidelines that were really not covered as well. The link Carrie shared is really good. The way the standards are published is there's a group of experts getting together and arguing, and quite literally arguing. It can get quite heated. And then there's a first draft that gets published and people can comment on the first draft. And based on the comments, then there's either an editor's draft or it goes to the next step. I think there were a lot of comments around 2.2, so it's going to an editor's draft. But we're told by the end of this year, we should have 2.2 as a candidate recommendation, which means it becomes live. I'm quite excited about it because cognitive accessibility is one of these things that hasn't really been covered. And let's face it, this is COVID times, and the number of people that had COVID that are left with brain fog, cognitive impairments is growing. So we as developers have to be a lot more aware of these changes, and this is going to help us on our way.
And just for anyone who's new, especially to accessibility, when I mentioned the WCAG, that stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the base site that Carrie has shared, in case the link isn't in there yet, is www.w3.org. So definitely take a look and see all that they have to offer.
Yeah, I popped a link in the YouTube under accessibility talks because that's where I was logged in as, but sorry about that. But that's, I guess, a chance to plug it. But the idea is like 2.2 is exciting to me, but I'm really excited about 3.0. And I don't know if that's a topic that we'll want to talk about later, but that is, of course, TBD as far as when it's going to actually go live. But to me, those changes are even more phenomenal and more getting to the crux of why WCAG guidelines are so difficult. There are these, so like Nick was saying, like people argue over the nuances and these tiny little pieces, and it's very dry verbiage. Like it's difficult even for accessibility professionals to really fully understand all of these, but there is that movement, again, thinking about cognitive and talking about plain language and really like feeling more inclusive in the language with that 3.0 adaption and kind of bringing it back down to a level that anyone can understand. Because right now I feel like you need to be an accessibility professional to even understand the specs, which in and of itself is kind of a problem. Like, how are people supposed to implement things they can't even read and can't even really fully understand? So that's just my opinion on that. But, yeah.
That was something that's what I'm really hoping to see in the future, is bringing that kind of dense, like kind of language of these standards, because that's one of the kind of a pain point for me of trying trying to train and educate people, and it's like, okay, when I refer them to like to a WCAG, and then it's like, how do I interpret this? How do I go about that? And that, and I spent a lot of time having to break it down into a way for them to understand. And that's something, for me, that's fine. I have a background in, journalism and stuff, and digging into these types of documents is old hat for me, but that's not true for everyone. And that becomes this thing of puts up barriers of really, when we talk about, well, we want to make things accessible, but if the very standards and guidelines aren't accessible to the people who are making it, then you're going to have a rough time.
Yeah, there's this interesting dichotomy that from a standards writing perspective, things have to be really precise, and sometimes it gets very dense because these documents are used in legal proceedings. But there's all the surrounding documents, the explanation documents, the techniques and all that. And I think there's been an effort from the education and outreach working group to start pushing to write in plain English, clear, concise sentences and front-loading content and making it easier to digest. But there's everybody's got to be on board with that. I recently actually filed a bug in the W3C's GitHub about, they released a very good document about cognitive accessibility, which was written in such a way that nobody with cognitive accessibility could parse the information. So that was a bit ironic, but there is movement. There is movement, and it's exciting, and it's just, we're so much further today than we were 10, 15 years ago.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that. I think, as we continue to talk about the state of things, I wanted to kind of shift a little bit towards top goals. So top goals for furthering accessibility in tech, over, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years. What do you guys think that will look like? Are there efforts that you see now that have started, or that you hope to see in the near future, so that we can further accessibility and make that available for everyone in tech?
Go ahead, Crystal.
No, go ahead.
I'll weigh in on this one because I think during AxCon, Haben Gurma had put it very well when she had spoke to getting us to a point where baseline accessibility is included by default across platforms, across products. And I think, a lot of emphasis in accessibility, or like it sometimes gets placed on new technology, which is important and very valuable, of course. But where I'd like to see us in the next 5 years is actually standardized accessibility and strong practices consistently placed across different product teams, so that we are implementing baseline accessibility standardize and then we can innovate further. We have to meet the minimum bar first as a community before, we can really innovate and thrive as much as we want to.
One of the things that I would love to see in the next 5 to 10 years is all these frameworks out there actually building accessibility from the ground up. Because as an auditor that, I look at different assets, and basically all my audit reports all came down to pretty much half of it is it's the framework's fault, whether it's Angular, Vue, React, you name it, has been built in a way that developers don't have a choice but to build things that are not fully accessible. So let's focus on making the tools that we use to build websites or other digital assets. Let's make those force us to be accessible.
What I would love to start seeing is accessibility being taught with boot camps in high school, those intro classes, because it is not taught. I actually, for a while, because I got scared in my career, and I went to a boot camp, even though I had previously worked as a front-end developer. Then I went into tech QA. Then I went to a boot camp, and I remember as this was like at the very beginning of my getting into accessibility. And I was like, well, why aren't we learning about accessibility? Because I was like, that would really inform on learning HTML and really, like learning accessibility, doing something, from the very beginning, but also learning the basics. And it was just it wasn't done. And there was like one day of learning of why inclusivity, and it was like everything all together, and I'm just like, this is not great. But there was a lot of focus on those frameworks, but then not really not learning how to and there was like a misunderstanding of like, well, if you have a framework, you have to use div and spans, and not, it's like where and this is no knock against React, but people didn't realize it's like, yeah, you can use semantic HTML in React. There is you don't have to use a div. Like, I think long time ago, like when React was still used in like maybe and it was still proprietary to Facebook, there was something where you like divs and spans were preferred, but that hasn't been true for the longest time. But that's still getting pushed in places where people they're just teaching them divs and spans. And then when you have an accessibility person coming, it's like, hey, you really need to build it like this, and it's like, well, I wasn't taught like that. And yeah, so just really kind of focusing on that beginning knowledge. So I'll be quiet now as going.
No, I'm going to plus one, Crystal. Divitis is real. I'm part of DQ's training team, and we teach adults, so people in the industry already. That's much more difficult because you've already learned some of those best practices, right? The divitis is a real thing. We have one exercise where we're like, name one other HTML element, right? The next one always is button. So headings, I think, are usually third, but so it's real. So there is this one program that I really love outside of the industry, which is that Teach Access. And they're doing that very same thing that Crystal's just talking about. It's that bridging that knowledge gap between what is taught or not taught in your CS classes or your design classes or whatever classes, or even if you have a different background, you maybe not even know about it, but you're in the industry, right? And where's that, there's this huge divide in knowledge and understanding. These are fundamental things that HCI and the industry, the tech industry, really is looking for these days. And you can do a quick search for accessibility jobs, and you can see it's booming. Like, it used to be 1 out of every 200 tech posting jobs would have it as a small little bullet point, and now there's actual roles. And just like Anna and just like Crystal, who are, big organizations, and they've got a very niche like accessibility role within their community. And there's more people than just them doing those kinds of jobs. So it's a really big point that, this is, if we think about accessibility as a fundamental knowledge that we need to have to be an expert at our field, then why is this not being taught? Like, there's a lot of really good questions around that. But I'll post that link as well.
I have a.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Always the fun of Zoom chats. I have a hearty +1 to Crystal's, point there. Like, I wasn't taught how to think about accessible. Well, my baseline classes in undergrad didn't include them. And so I opted in to learn about inclusive design and realized, I was like, oh my goodness, I have this one class where I opted into it. And there's this whole group of things that I had no idea about. And like, for me, finally moving into an accessibility designer role is like the dream job. And I cannot wait for more folks to have those opportunities, because there's a lot of potential opportunity out there that I think is not yet happening as much as I'd like it to.
I had a.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say, I definitely agree with Crystal too. I mean, when I'm, learning, all I know were divs and spans, and like, they don't, teach you how to, create semantic HTML. So definitely agree there.
I had a run-in with a booth camp organizer, and I said, why aren't you teaching about accessibility? And he says, well, our booth camp is really for local people, aimed at getting them work locally, and the local demand is not for people that know accessibility. So I had a very extensive conversation saying, well, actually, accessibility, it's a basic skill. Like, you have to know about security, you have to know about performance. You don't expect things to be built without performance or security, so you shouldn't expect things to be built without accessibility. I think this concept of introducing accessibility in education, whether it's boot camps, tutorial anywhere on the web, or CS degrees, it's so critical to what we're going to do. And I actually don't know the answer. I don't know how we educate these people that educate baby devs, if you want, how to do things. I don't know the answer to that, but if we could find that, then we don't have an accessibility problem anymore.
Yeah, Nick, I was going to say the exact same thing, that I think it's easy to point at boot camps and say, oh, they should be teaching accessibility, but the goal there is to, their job is to teach so much in such a small amount of time. And I think accessibility is something that you really need to learn well to do it right. And
strong disagree here.
Okay. Well, I also want to say that, to your point, I would like to see in the next 5 to 10 years the shift in job requirements move towards accessibility, because a boot camp's responsibility is to get a person into a hireable position, get them the most hireable skills. And from a lot of the job descriptions I see very little focus on accessibility, which is a shame, but it shifts the focus onto employers if employers focus on accessibility, boot camps will respond in turn.
Yeah. Austin, to your point that, if you're going to teach accessibility, you have to teach it so people know it well. I think that's one of the problems we have. We have so many people that are afraid of touching accessibility because they're afraid of doing it wrong. They're afraid of not knowing enough. And I keep pushing for, we don't need 2 billion accessibility experts. We need 2 billion accessibility champions that have enough understanding of accessibility to know, hey, this is wrong, there's a better way to do it, and that can actually either dig up the resources or reach out to an expert. I think that would be a lot more effective in terms of accessibility as a whole. Of course, don't get me wrong, I'd love for everybody to become accessibility expert, but that's, not everybody has the spoons to do that.
I was just going to tag on to what Nick was saying in the sense of like people who are true accessibility consultants and like that's all they do is accessibility. We don't want the easy things. We don't want the keyboard traps. We don't want the heading level being weird or everyone using divs. We want the meaty, juicy stuff when it comes to accessibility, those real things that you have to research or set up some prototypes and really kind of get into it, because those are the easy things, like the ones that Nick was saying. Those are the ones that I want people to already know. Like, it's easy to pick up an automated tool. It's easy to use your keyboard as your assistive technology device and do those things. Then there might be some ones that are the gray area, right? And that's when you consult someone like Nick, right? Or myself or Crystal or any of the people on the panel or our companies, right? And those are the ones that we want to really get into and dig into and like have this conversation and say, okay, I like this or I like that, or this is the most accessible pattern, for instance. So I'm just agreeing with them, adding a +1. I'll just agree to everything Nick says for the rest of the day. But yeah, I think that, maybe that's only me, but I don't want the easy stuff. You guys can take care of the easy stuff. I want the hard stuff.
I want some hard stuff, like harder things, because I've been dealing with the easier things for a while. And I'm like, all right, where's the nuance? Where's the challenge? But I agree with what Nick said. And in that I don't necessarily think everyone has the bandwidth to become an accessibility expert. But I do think if a team of folks can advocate for accessibility and champion it, they can find the dedication, the time, the process that they need to go through the basics and get the help on the advanced issues as they need it. And, Sherry, Brian, I always forget names, from VMware, who heads their accessibility, said it best: 98% of the web has accessibility issues. Please start being curious, start digging in, because it's better than nothing, because right now we have so much to do to fix.
So I would like to add one thing. So yeah, so the main problem which I see, so I am not an accessibility expert. I'm more of a developer who is exploring accessibility, and I try to spread awareness. So the main problem which I see is that the web is highly inaccessible today, right? So that is the layer. But why it is inaccessible? So what, from the interactions which I have done, I have found out that people are really not aware. So again, it boils down to people are not taught in boot camps. They are not taught in colleges. So even I was not taught. So I also was not aware of accessibility for larger part of my career. So I got to even know about accessibility just 2 years ago, but that through an event. So there is this Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is celebrated every year. We celebrated it just now. So then I got to know that what I was missing on. So what I feel is that once people start seeing, so there is one thing in talking about accessibility, and there is one thing in letting people know. So spreading that awareness. So if we incorporate these things again in multiple channels, because even not everyone really joins boot camps. So there are many people who don't join boot camps. There are many people who don't even have degree, but they're still working today, which I see a trend very increasingly in Twitter. So we need to incorporate accessibility in these places, but we also need to incorporate this in company level. We need to talk about it at all levels. So I think we also talked about how to put it in company level. But what I would like to see in next 5 years is people are talking a lot about accessibility. You are talking in a team, you are talking about accessibility. When you are creating a new feature, we are talking about accessibility. So that change needs to come, and that change needs to come from every employee, from even ground up as well, because we also need to be aware. We need to learn more and check about it. And also I think that there are very less events on accessibility. Many companies are doing a lot. AxCon was really good. Then there are some other events as well, but still we still don't talk enough about accessibility, and somehow it's not reaching the main look, like front-end developers or the designers or the testers. So that awareness, so that is the main word which I want to like really focus on. Is, I mean, in 5 years, I really want to see everyone, most of us, everyone aware about accessibility. Once we are aware and we know that what is the issue people face if we do not create accessible like components. So this was what led to my realization. When I learned about it, I learned that, okay, I'm doing terribly wrong because I am making things inaccessible for people, and people might not be able to like walk through it. They might not be able to maybe click that button, keeping it simple, if we say. So that led to like I felt very bad, and then I started exploring. So when I meet new people and when I talk to them, so they also, the main thing which comes down is that they also say the same thing to me, like, oh my god, this is so cool, I never knew about it. So that is the expression which I get by most of the people. And also like in interviews, so I would also say that whenever we are like hiring at company level or something, if we incorporate this in that level also, see, if we make this also mandatory, so that is also really nice, because we get to know that people are really aware or not about accessibility. Because my personal experience is, I always ask about accessibility when I'm interviewing someone, and many times like I just hear like response like, yeah, it is for blind people. So this is the this is the broad concept of accessibility, like mindset in people, because they don't know much. They just know that, okay, accessibility is for blind people, they use something called software which reads it to them, so it is for them. And I have also heard from people, like when I talk like about making things accessible, that, well, this is very complex, I don't think they will use it anyways. I mean, that different kind of things. So until and unless we are really spreading this awareness, even teaching, I don't think will, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it has to come from within is something which I feel it might be really something different which I'm telling. But yeah, I agree with all you all. But awareness is really important, and it needs to come from inside. And there is some, I mean, we need to empathize with the users if we really want to keep building accessible things. Otherwise, we know all the things, but we still might feel that, okay, the time is less, I might not make this accessible right now. Like, optional thing. Accessibility is like optional thing. We are talking about performance. There are many things about performance, but there is not, I don't think there is enough about accessibility still. Although there are very, very nice people and very, I mean, even I see the work of all, they are doing a lot, but still I think we need more on accessibility. I think I spoke a lot.
So I want to add, we've been talking a lot about, what devs can do and about the future of accessibility. And I think one piece that we haven't brought up yet is that we have the ability to give our users choice. We have the ability to give them different experiences. But we need to do more of that. And I think that that's where the future of accessibility really is going. And I did give a GAD talk about that last week, because it's the idea that I am only one person and I know what my limitations are. I know what my preferences are as a user. There's like 7 billion people in the world. How do I know possibly like those infinite combinations of things that they want, right? It might be their AT devices like you're talking about, but it could just be that they prefer dark mode, right? That's just my preference, right? Or maybe that I have a disability and I want a certain experience, I want a certain setting for everything. So I feel like that to me is the ultimate future of accessibility, is that we've got the technology, we've got 550 million font choices. Why is it that when I go to a website, I'm served up maybe one or two and I have no other choices? Like, why, there's like a lot more options. So I like that ability to be able to choose my own adventure when it comes to accessibility, and really, giving that to people to really, customize their experience.
Yeah, I tell people, like, when they're like, oh, I don't want anyone to build to just like a product of just to my experience, because my disability, like with my visual impairment, it's vastly different. In one day, I go through a day of where I can see pretty clearly and not have to use a screen reader to definitely have to use a screen, which was partially the reason why I came on late to the check-in before, of trying to, make things, like being able to see things. And I am one person, and and my particular needs are different. And that's I would love, I really want us to get to the point where, where it's like, well, all people who, all blind people want the, get served the same things. All people
But
who are low
that's
vision.
true, though. You know how that is, right? All blind people are the same, and there's no spectrum, right? It's just like one, and we only have one AT and one browser. Like, it just boggles my mind that people don't think about how varied the situation is, just like you were mentioning with your disability.
I got yelled at. They're like, well, I use VoiceOver with Chrome. And they're like, you're not supposed to use it with Chrome. But I was like, I do stuff with Chrome. I don't like using Safari. So, and that, and feeling bad that I'm, I'm not doing things right. And that's the thing of like, why do I have to, it's like, well, if you're, because you have this particular disability, your solution needs to be this particular solution, and you need to be fine with it. And that's unacceptable. And I want, and eventually, I knock on wood, cross like that we can get away from that type of thought.
I really like the discussion here that goes into the spectrum of accessible experiences. I also like the example of a parent at home who has to attend a conference for work for some reason, but also has a barking dog and a child in one arm, and this idea of temporary disabilities if people get injured for whatever reason. And there's a whole bunch of different issues that related to accessibility beyond just visual impairment, but reasons why people might want a screen reader or captions on videos because they want to have their sound off because whatever else is going on in their life in their background. So yeah, I think that if those examples were brought up more frequently, it also makes it easier for people that don't have some permanent impairments to be able to relate and empathize with wanting to create an experience that's inclusive for everyone, both with permanent or temporary impairments. Yeah.
But that was my point. It's sort of like, you can't ever figure that out. There's no such thing. There's, like Crystal was saying, combinations of browsers and AT devices that you're not supposed to use, but people use them. So, you have to build to them. It's a conundrum. And I think the choices, giving your users choice is really the only solution to that, because you can't possibly support all of that. And I think that's what makes some people mad about accessibility, is because it is a moving target, so to speak. Because not only do you have all of that, you've got these things like, what happens when your browser updates? What happens when your AT changes? What happens when we introduce a new technology like VR, XR? Right? It just like muddies the water pretty quickly.
I think that's.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's having to build for all of the unknown unknowns.
Yeah, I think in terms of, that's kind of what kind of gets me about how we think about disability and how we think about accessibility, is we, not because of WCAG, but because of how people have interpreted it, we see it as very linear. And so, but the reality is that, people have varied experiences with disability, and people have different backgrounds and different needs. And there's a lot of upcoming changing technology, as there always is. And so like, people get frustrated that like, we can't just follow this guideline exactly and fix this issue. But like, again, and I say this a lot, but like, accessibility is design, and design is complicated. It's a wicked problem, as it were. And so like, we need to as a community, stop thinking about accessibility as just a list of to-do items and start understanding that it is a human need, and that it has the complication and the variance of all human needs that we design for.
Awesome.
One of the things, just briefly, one of the things to keep in mind too is that when we give user choice, we also want to avoid to fall in the trap of thinking, well, I'm not going to do accessibility because I'm giving user choice. I'm going to let the assistive technology handle it, which is something that I see a lot of designers and developers do and say. But ultimately, we have to design it correctly and design it and build it in such a way that the user can have this choice and not think, oh, well, we're going to let the AT handle it, because I'm sorry, it might be 10 or 15 years or maybe more before a screen reader can see an image and actually decide whether it's informative or decorative. And if it's informative, then accurately render alt text. So maybe down the road, technology will allow us to do that, but we still have to build it in such a way that this choice is doable.
Yeah, and to tag on to Nick, and we're like on question 2 out of all the questions, because this is what happens when you get accessibility professionals in here. But the plus one to Nick's was that, some things are easy to change. Color contrast, fonts, things like that. Things that are more difficult to change are things like the structure. So the things that, like the headings, semantics beyond divs, right? The way that things are laid out. And that's really the crux of the AT devices, right? They're looking more at that HTML level and not that design level. So keeping in mind that, this is the future, right? 10 years down the road, maybe less, but you always have to have that foundational piece built. It has to be built in a structural way. And that's why overlays don't work, right? Is because they can't affect the underlying structure of the scaffolding, regardless of what technology that you're using, what stack, what anything, right? As that skeleton of that site can't be rearranged by something on top of it. I thought I'd open that Pandora's box and say the word overlay, because we know we all love them. Sorry, that was being sarcastic. Very, very much do not love them.
Well, oh, go ahead.
No, please. If you let us keep going, we'll keep talking.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. No, it's you guys are bringing up a lot of great information that also segues into the different tools and resources that are kind of up and coming, right? So we have different tools and resources for testing accessibility compliance, as well as a growing number of accessible UI component libraries. So kind of looking at those different technologies in mind, have you all used any particular ones that you want to talk about in personal projects, maybe at work, or even tips on, for someone who wants to look at these different libraries and just have an idea, like, where do I start? Like, I'm a developer that wants to focus a bit on accessibility. Where can I start?
I'm going to give a non-helpful answer, but maybe I'm going to give a startup idea to somebody. One of my biggest pain points right now with several different clients is an accessible chatbot. These are not particularly difficult to make happen, but there aren't any out there. So if you're a developer, please build one, build a fully accessible chatbot, do user testing with disabled people, pay them for testing, sell it. $80, $90 a month. You only need about 175 clients to make $200,000 a year. Please do it. Please do it. And once you have it, build on that library. Start adding fully accessible thing, because the demand is there. Companies, large companies, are required to be accessible. They don't know where to find these widgets, these third-party plugins. So go out there and build it. Make money. Make my life easier.
I think we have to start a team here and now to start working on that. I think that's what this is, right? No? Okay. But I mean, that sounds amazing. I was going to pivot just a little bit, and I'd love to hear more about that from you, Nick. But in terms of like accessible component libraries and things like that, my main point that I bring up a lot about this is to be careful with them, to not to assume that they are accessible just by default, because a lot of accessibility comes with implementation details. Having an accessible system to start with is going to get you really far, but it's not everything. And so, be mindful that there are other things you will need to consider when building, even with a very strong component library.
Yeah, that's the thing with, I am always like when that I get asked like for suggestions and things like that. I really kind of like it's, I don't really have one. I'm like, oh, this one, there's some good ones out there, but at the same time, they're not the end all be all. And you really do have to have a good base knowledge. And that's the only thing I just like with Anna saying, they can't, they can't do that, can't do all the heavy lifting. And I see sometimes that like those get implemented, and they do, and that's where you get a lot of issues when it's clear that it was like, well, we used that component, we used that library, it said it was accessible, so we didn't really have to do more than that. And and you're like, well, it's obvious that you didn't do more than that, because I can I can find a lot of things going on. Like, it's just when I'm just wandering around the internet, just on my using my screen reader, I'll look, I can just really tell, like, and I'll go look at the company and look at their engineering blogs, and I'll see something and they're like, we use this accessible component and this is great, and I'm like, yeah, you didn't do more than that. You just kind of let that do the work, and now I'm never coming to this site again because I can't navigate it.
I have way too many thoughts on this, so I'll keep it brief. But Hayden Pickering and I created separately accessible style guides back in 2016, 2017, early 2017. And so they've been, we were one of the first ones, both of us kind of at the same time. Technically, I was like a week earlier. But kind of, and obviously he made like a brand whole new book, and everything went way beyond what I did. But for us internally, like we started at the organization I was at the time, where we had this grappled with the same questions. It's like, you can't just go over to Stack Overflow and pick whatever. And so that's where the idea of, okay, let's make these as accessible as possible. But the problem is that you have choices, which is also a good thing. The tricky part is finding the correct pattern for your environment, your particular environment. And knowing that you need to retest these patterns as well. And I think that's part of it as well, is that they get tested, they get passed, but then they never get revisited. They need to be dusted off occasionally because of all the changes in technology, like the browsers and the versionings, the operating systems, ATs, all the things, the user preferences, right? But it's like this idea that there is no one perfect solution for this as well. And there's a lot of different options. So you have to really weigh the choices, right? Like, what are you supporting for AT? Which browsers are you supporting, right? Which versions of them are you supporting? Is this pattern going to be so difficult that I'm going to create it and nobody else is going to know how to replicate it? You have these pattern libraries. So many times I've seen on assessments where you can totally tell it's a copy paste kind of situation because the ID is the same. So Nick's laughing because it's true. And it's always like the same ID repeated. And you're like, you just copy pasted that. And you didn't really understand the functionality behind it and why that ID needed to change. I'm thinking of like a form field, right? If I've got an ID associated with that field, and I have that same ID associated with a different field, like first name, last name. And Crystal, you guys can't see her, but she's laughing as well, because I'm sure she's had that experience with a screen reader where it's like, okay, so what field am I actually, filling out here? Which field really goes with this particular label? And it's the idea that you've just made it harder because you've made a choice that you thought was accessible, but you didn't really understand the foundational accessibility piece behind it. And so you've now made it even more inaccessible than if you would have just done nothing at all, right? And so I think that's the other piece of it, is that you have these well-meaning people that want to do the right thing, but they're putting tab indexes on headings and paragraphs, right? And things like that. So it's hard, right? That's the long, short answer, is that it is definitely also a choice that we have to make, with an educated choice. But Crystal, now you have to tell your story, because you're nodding the whole time when I was giving those examples. So when you use your screen reader, have you run into similar issues before?
I run the gamut of like, yeah, like where everything has like the same idea, like, because I do suspect that some people will just, pull stuff off of Stack Overflow and just be like, here we go. And, or like, it's, where, cause I'll, especially when I'm using, when I'm on desktop and using voiceover, and I'll use the rotor to kind of like, that's how I'll usually, like, I think a lot of people think when, especially when it comes to a screen reader, that you'll just go through and just like start scanning that way. And that some people will do, and I will do that. But a lot of times I'm just on the rotor, just trying to find what I need. And it's awesome when everything is the same title of like, where it's like, the read more example, which is, again, comes up all the time because everything is read more, or the controls, or button, or like, it's like field. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to fill this out. I don't know, it's like, so, if I have to get up close to my monitor or my laptop to see, which sometimes, sadly, I have to do, or I have to go put it, like with my particular disability, I have to wear, if I don't want to use a screen reader, I have to put in a contact in, but it hurts a lot of times. So I'll have to go put it in and then like sit and cry trying to fill out a form because I couldn't use the screen reader because my eye hurts, but I'm also having to fill out a form that is and navigate a page where I can't really, I don't know how to fill it out, because all the headings are the same, all the controls are the same, all the landmarks are named the same thing, and all I just want to do is like buy a blanket or buy something, or usually buy cat litter. Something like that. It's
But you would need a blanket after that. It sounds exhausting. You need a nap after something like that.
That's the thing I don't like. Sometimes I have, and my husband see me where I have cried of, it's, I think when it comes to, and this is just my personal anecdote of having to deal with navigating the like web. And as my I was only born with one functional eye, and now in the last few years my other eye, my vision has started to go, and I've had to start dealing with the the reality of I'm eventually I might become completely reliant on a screen reader, for not just on my phone but on desktop and doing everything. And just coming up with things where I wanted to get on, I don't mean to call him, but Discord, and I couldn't get it past the captcha, and I had to have my husband come and do that for me, and I felt so bad, and I kept apologizing, and I was like, he's doing something, and I'm like, I just want to get on here so I can play a game with people, and I can't get past the captcha because I can't see it, or things like that, where I've had to have him come and look because I can't navigate it, and I don't like the screen reader, is blocked from it, which happens with those overlays. I've had that happen where all I want to do is I use TalkBack. I just want to use, I know TalkBack, I know it well, I can navigate very well with it, and I get to one that has an overlay and I cannot use it. And they're like, use our screen, like it's supposed to, it's like, well, they say they have a screen reader mode and that you can turn it off. And it's like, well, I shouldn't have to turn it off. You should, it's, so I'm getting emotional about that because it's still, like, that the reality of trying to being someone, when having a disability, just trying to do something that you just need to do, you just want to do without any like huge amount of effort, it means a lot. And that's, yeah.
And we talked about this, Crystal, at your last talk, when you're talking about the economics behind accessibility, and some people who have have these needs, the AT needs, they don't have the funds necessarily to support that as well. So I really think about accessibility in general as empowerment, right? And it's about that user choice and ultimately the empowerment, because we're laughing about your situation and needing a blanket, but I mean the reality is that that just sucks, right? Like it shouldn't have to be like that. It shouldn't, you should be empowered to buy all the cat litter that you can imagine, right? With like limited issues. So I really think that maybe that's part of the issue. Maybe once people understand that part, that human side of accessibility, that we'll have more of these changes happening quicker. That's the hope, at least.
Well, I really hate to end the conversation here. This has been a really great talk. Hopefully, maybe in the future we could do a part 2, because I still think, we still have great questions. And Crystal, your story is, very, very like, it's hard to hear that you had to go through all of those, but at the same time, like that experience is allowing all these other devs to like really think about how they're developing. So thank you for sharing that. So, okay, great. So if you really enjoyed today's talk, be sure to check out other This Media events coming up. They do have several other state of in the future, such as State of Angular and State of Automation. And you can join me along with several other amazing software engineers for our monthly Women in Tech mentorship. For all of you watching, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Definitely reach out to us on Twitter, social media, but Google us and reach out, especially if you have any questions. So hope to see you real soon. Bye.
Bye.